September 23rd. Is this the first day of autumn? I think so. Okay. All right. Happy autumn. Council study, 23rd, 2019 council study session. Our first presentation. Wait a minute. Hello? Better? That's why you wasn't getting any response. Good evening. Good evening. Our first presentation is an introduction to Southwest Power Pool. Tread lightly. Mr. City Manager.
All right, Mark Randall, Assistant City Manager. I just thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. We have a couple of presentations tonight which we're excited to provide for you, which focus on issues that are very important to Independence Power and Light. I'd also want to acknowledge we have several members of our Public Utility Advisory Board here in attendance. They've been invited to attend this because they're also very interested in these topics, both of which have been requested by the council and by members of the PUAB. And the first one is an overview of Southwest Power Pool. As you know, Independence participates in the integrated market and through SPP, who effectively really control all of our assets of production. And as a member of SPP, they're very interested in our capacity assets. And the imminent closure of Blue Valley plant has focused renewed attention on our relationship with SPP. So tonight we're very fortunate to have Mr. Lanny Nickel, Vice President with Southwest Power Pool, to give an overview of SPP and to answer any questions that you all may have. So Lanny, if you would mind coming up to the podium here.
All right. Well, good evening. Good evening. It's certainly good to be here, and I hope that after I give my presentation and try to tell you a little bit about what we do and how we do it, we all walk away with a little bit more light shed on the situation, and you guys can be more fully informed. And if you guys have any questions along the way, I am happy to pause and answer whatever questions you might have. With that, let's jump right into it. Southwest Power Pool is what is known in the industry as a regional transmission organization. As the name might imply, regional conveys a sense of fairly broad geographic scale, and I will try my best to help you better understand what we mean by that as we go through the presentation. Our mission is pretty simple. It's helping our members, such as City of Independence, work together to keep the lights on today and in the future. That working together piece is pretty important. Obviously, keeping the lights on is important, both today and in the future, but we don't do that unless we work together. And SPP, as an independent, nonprofit organization, sees its role in that as being really critical. We are responsible for facilitating the membership, meeting, talking, debating. Sometimes those debates can be rather long and drawn out, as I'm sure you guys may have experienced even yourselves. But it's important that we all get to the table and that we all are heard and that we all have an opinion and express those throughout the debate on any particular policy or set of rules that we all agree to abide by. Yes, sir.
Not for profit. That's a 501.
501c.
Thank you.
You bet. That was an easy question. Hope there's more like that. All right, let's move on. So again, reliability is job one. Now we have a number of different ways that we ensure reliability, and we'll hopefully touch on those and maybe in some cases dig in a little deeper on the different ways that we do that. We like to use an analogy because generally when we're talking to people, they ask us what we do. Beyond about 5 or 10 seconds, their eyes start flickering I start glazing over, and it's really hard to really describe in a short period of time what it is that we do. But we do like to use this analogy of being the air traffic controller for the electric power industry. Much like air traffic control, we don't own, SPP doesn't own the power lines or the generators. We don't have a responsibility to make sure that individual homes are being served. But what we do is we make sure that when generation is needed, that it is produced. We have the authority and responsibility to direct generators to come online and actually produce energy when consumers need it. And then we're responsible for making sure that energy, as it leaves point A, can be transmitted and delivered to point B. So like air traffic control does, it doesn't own the airplanes, it doesn't own the airports. What it does is make sure that an airplane, when it leaves Kansas City, can get to Little Rock, presumably tomorrow for me. It'll get there on time and safely. But that's what air traffic control does, and we perform a very similar responsibility for the electric power industry. We have done a number of calculations and studies to try to ensure that we are providing value to our members. We don't want to exist just to exist. We want to make sure that what we do is done not only in the right way, but also in a way that provides value to members such as City of Independence. We have a cost of about $160 million. That's our administration cost. It's the cost of running SPP. We recover that cost from our members. In return for that cost, we provide a number of different services that we believe provides a value annually of about $2.2 billion. That's a pretty good return on that investment or that cost. It represents about a 14-to-1 benefit to cost ratio. Now that's our calculation. Our members have certainly weighed in on that and have provided input in terms of how we calculate that and how we derive that value. And some members may get more, some members may get a little less. That is a value that we calculate on behalf of the entire region that receives services from SPP. So what that means to the average residential customer that uses, let's say, 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. Now again, that's just an average. Not all of them use that much. Some of them use more, some of them use less. On average, that means that they're saving about $7.63 because of the services that we provide. Mention that we are a regional transmission organization. There are other parties that provide similar services, perform similar functions as SPP does. You can see by this particular map, we are the entity that's actually right in the middle part of the United States. So you might wonder, why in the world do you call yourself the Southwest Power Pool? And I don't know. I have no idea why we call ourselves that, but we were formed in 1941. My guess is that it's because of the fact that the grid is divided. The whole United States is really divided into 3 different interconnections. And the eastern interconnection starts at the western border of SPP and goes all the way to the eastern part of the United States. The western interconnection is part 2 of that 3-part grid, and it starts at our western border and goes all the way to California. And then, as you might imagine, you've got Texas. They don't want to be interconnected with anybody else. And so they have what's known as the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. So this is just a guess, nobody knows for sure, that we are at least at one time, before we expanded all the way to the Canadian border, we had what is known as the southwestern part of the eastern interconnection. So just a guess, nobody really knows. Could have been also, we're housed and based in Little Rock, Arkansas. University of Arkansas used to play in the Southwest Conference. Somebody has suggested and postulated that that might be where it came from, but nobody really knows. All right, trivia out of the way. We have 99 members, of which City of Independence is one. Now, why this is important is because our membership is very diverse. We have members that are investor-owned utilities. We have members that are municipals, such as City of Independence. We have members that are cooperatives that own generation and or transmission assets. We have state agencies. We have parties that only own and operate generators. Those are known as independent power producers. We have parties that only own and operate the high voltage transmission power lines. Those are known as independent transmission companies. We also have a federal agency. They report to the federal government. And then we actually have two large retail customers, one of which is Walmart, one of which is Google. And both of those members actually joined SPP within the last year, so we're excited to add them to the footprint. Every member gets a voice, and that's what's important. When we vote on certain policies that the entire region will have to abide by once it is approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, every member gets a say in the establishment of that policy, and it doesn't matter how big or how small you are. Independence's neighbors, Kansas City Power and Light, gets one voice, one vote. City of Independence gets one voice, one vote. That's important to understand how that functions and how we operate. You can see that our operating region is fairly large geographically. We cover all our parts of 14 states, beginning with the southern part of our footprint in Texas all the way to the Canadian border. Represents about 546,000 square miles, a population served of about 17.5 million. We have over 800 generating plants that operate within our footprint and over 5,000 substations. Heavily interconnected and interdependent transmission network. So to help you kind of understand the difference between our role, which is at the transmission level, and City of Independence's role, which is more at the distribution level. If you think about the interstate highway system, SPP is responsible for that, for the planning and operation of the interstate highway system, so to speak, for the electric power grid. We probably could also say we're responsible for state highways. Once you get down to the local roads, the county highways, the roads that actually gets a driver from, let's say, California all the way to their home at the end of Main Street, those local roads are maintained and operated by utilities such as City of Independence. That is not our job. Our job is at the transmission level, which is again analogous to the interstate and state highway system. There is a handoff, and that's where a substation generally comes in, the handoff that ensures electricity can be generated, transported across the interstate system, but then ultimately get onto that local road that'll take them all the way home where they live. And that handoff is between SPP and that local utility. Generating capacity, just to give you a sense of just how big and broad our system is across the 14-state region. Now, we're about a 50,000 megawatt peak load system. Compare that to City of Independence, who has about 300 megawatts during peak. SPP across its footprint has about 50,000 megawatts at peak. We have about 90,000 megawatts of generating capacity. So you might think, well, my gosh, you've got 30,000 more megawatts of generating capacity than you really need. The difference, though, is this 90,000 that I'm talking about is what is referred to as nameplate capacity, which is simply representative of what the manufacturers tell you that those plants can operate at, but not necessarily what they will operate during peak conditions. That term, what they can operate at during peak conditions, is what we call accredited capacity. And sometimes there's a difference. For example, wind generation, solar generation doesn't always produce what it can. For example, when wind's not blowing, or when a cloud happens to shade the solar cell from the sunlight, it needs to produce energy. Accredited capacity is what's really important in terms of making sure that we've got enough capable of serving our peak load. Yes, sir.
How often is that audited? I mean, how do we know? Because they say mean, everybody, we hope, is in good faith, but that they say, hey, we have the capacity, but they really don't.
So we audit it once a year. We require each of the load-serving members, such as City of Independence, to, ahead of the summer peak season, tell us exactly what their load is forecasted to be for the upcoming summer and what generating resources they have available to serve that load. If they're short, if, for example, because we require that they maintain at least 12% reserves. So as an example, let's say 300 megawatts is what City of Independence has as its peak load. Then that means they have to have at least 300 megawatts of generating capacity accredited plus an additional 12%. So what is that, 36 megawatts, another 36 megawatts, I want to make sure I calculated that correctly, above the 300. That's what they have to bring to the table. If they don't, they are subject to a penalty. Any of our load-serving members, if they don't meet that minimum 12% reserve margin, is subject to a penalty that can be fairly stiff. As an example, if you're 100 megawatts short, that would represent a penalty of a little over $10 million for that year. So for every 100 megawatts, it's roughly $10 million. So it is something that we must ensure that we have. And the reason we need to make sure that every load-serving entity is bringing the amount of capacity that is needed to the table is because if any one is short, that puts more pressure on everybody else to make up that insurance policy. That really is what is being provided. It's insurance. It's making sure that if we have a contingency, if we lose a major power plant, that we got somebody we can call in to bring in the reserves that we need to make sure that everybody's lights stay on when they're needed. It's a great question. Appreciate it. Want to give you a little bit of sense of the breakdown of both capacity and energy. You can see that from a nameplate capacity perspective, SPP is really rich in natural gas resources. About 40% of our nameplate capacity comes from gas-fired generators, about 29% from coal, and about 23% from wind. However, in terms of the annual energy that's produced, coal supplies about 42% of the region's energy needs. However, wind has recently climbed to the number 2 fuel producing resource, and it's at about 24%. I expect by the end of this year to see about 26% of our region's needs being met by wind throughout the year. 10 years ago, wind would have been scarcely a blip on this screen, but we've seen a tremendous amount of growth in wind resources. Over the last 5 years, as a result of that, our carbon emissions have reduced by 26% over the last 5 years as a result of the renewables, particularly wind, that has been added to our system. It's a growing commodity for us, and because of the fact that we've been able to plan for that and build the transmission that's needed to deliver it from where the wind blows the most to where consumers actually need it, we've been able to reliably accommodate and incorporate that clean resource into our fuel mix.
On that, I give these, all the council and the mayor, some things the other day, and I like that you said Texas wants to be separate. I was wondering how they got their power the other day when it went from $15 to $9,000 for a megawatt hour.
Yeah,
so did SPP supply that?
We supplied as much as we could. Now, unfortunately, we only have about 800 megawatts of tie line or transmission capacity between SPP and ERCOT. So all they could get from us was about 800 megawatts. They actually serve more load than we do. They have about 66,000 megawatts. So 800 megawatts is not a big piece of what they need. The other thing, I mentioned that we have a 12% reserve margin requirement. Right now, they're carrying about 8% reserves, and they have been dangerously close this summer.
Yeah, the wind stopped blowing that day, I heard.
Yep. When the wind stops blowing, they're in trouble.
Of
Of course, you know, in Texas, it hardly ever stops blowing.
Texas.
I'm just teasing. Yes, sir.
They, you mean Texas?
Yeah.
It blows in Missouri.
So you sold them the 800?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Because we had excess at the time.
Not, yeah, I understand that.
Yep.
And you can't, you're within boundaries that you have to adhere to, too.
That's
But
right.
if you'd have had 800,000,
Well, the problem is we're limited by, in this case, there are only 2 highways between SPP's region and ERCOT. You can only transport so much energy on those highways,
and how much is it?
800 megawatts.
You were at max to give.
We were delivering all we could to them, but
So it wouldn't have mattered how much you had.
that's right. That's right.
So-
In our footprint in SPP, we have many, 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 many more highways that we can use to deliver the energy in our footprint to the consumers in our footprint.
And how would they hook up with you if we needed theirs? I mean, would it just be the same amount back?
It would be, absolutely. That's all we can count on from Texas is about 800 megawatts.
So, and is that, I mean, obviously you go somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now,
you're
fortunately,
available, you have your lines.
yeah. Fortunately, if you look at the map I showed you earlier, the neighbors that we have to our east, Mid-Continent ISO being a large one and PJM being another large one, we are heavily interconnected with those regions and can import from them when we need to, and vice versa. There are no real transmission constraints between us and our neighbors to the east, but there are significant constraints between us and our neighbors to the south, in this case ERCOT, and between us and our neighbors to the west. Okay, so I talked about the tremendous growth that we've seen in renewables over the last decade or so. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination. We still have, and I mentioned we're a 50,000 megawatt load. We have about 90,000 nameplate megawatts of capacity. Actually, if you look at the accredited amount, it's about 65,000 megawatts. So that's probably the more relevant number. But we still have a tremendous amount of new generation that customers are proposing to interconnect. Doesn't mean that they will interconnect to the grid, but they're proposing to. So it's just interesting to note that. We have about 50,000 megawatts of wind that hasn't yet been connected that wants to connect. We have about 30,000 megawatts of solar that wants to connect and hasn't. And then we have about 7,000 megawatts of storage. And this is all utility scale, and it would be connected at the transmission grid instead of at the distribution grid, because I understand you guys have about 11 megawatts of solar connected on the distribution system. But it doesn't mean that it'll all connect. It's just that there's a serious interest in connecting, and that's heavily tied to the production tax credits for wind that will expire at the end of this year. So it's likely that that will slow down once those production tax credits expire. But solar will continue to have a PTC in place for another couple of years. So we expect solar to see the same kind of boon that wind saw over the last decade.
But predominantly solar would be west,
Yes.
where
Yep.
we don't have the availability of lines.
That's right. And for the most part, that's where the wind has connected to. I mean, if you look at a wind penetration or wind potential map that NREL puts out, it'll show you that the highest potential for wind is right on the western side of our footprint. That's where the wind blows the strongest. Interestingly enough, while solar has the highest intensity in California and Arizona, if you look at where those two resources have the highest confluence of intensity, it's actually in our footprint. That's where you can get the most potential for solar and wind combined is in our footprint. So it's just, we've been referred to as the Saudi Arabia of wind. I think we're probably more like the Saudi Arabia of renewables. Just a lot of potential. Now, to build it, and interconnect it and deliver it does take transmission, and that can be a challenge.
But you have the ability to transport generation.
Well, we have the ability to transport some, and one of our key roles is to make sure that we have infrastructure needed for future usage. And so one of the things that we require, anytime a new generator wants to connect, they have to first come to us so that we can make sure that we study the impacts. And if new transmission infrastructure is needed, then we will direct it to be built. So that's one of our roles. We plan that interstate system, so to speak.
Right, I can see looking to the future and that under those considerations. Now you will have to ascertain whether these lines are worth the money.
Yeah. And for new generators that want to connect, they have to pay for those infrastructure upgrades as well. So it won't be paid for by your customers and your ratepayers. If a new generator wants to connect, whoever it is that is asking for that connection will have to agree to pay whatever upgrade costs are needed on the system for a new generator. Now, for an existing generator, we have to study the delivery of the output of that existing generator, and sometimes to deliver that output, we need to add transmission infrastructure as well.
Could you comment on storage?
Sure.
I guess most of that is battery?
Yes.
Or is it in the form?
Yeah, it's all battery.
It's all battery?
Yep.
Okay.
It's all battery, and most of it is the customer that's requesting it is desiring to actually co-locate it with a solar resource or a wind resource, it's an interesting thing to watch. They're finding that you get a lot of value out of co-locating them in the same place.
As the times change with technology, chances are that will increase the value of solar.
Absolutely.
And we'll be able to count more
Yep.
of our solar toward capacity, and the same with wind.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Today, a solar resource by itself, you can probably count on about 50 to 60% of its nameplate capacity being there when you need it. When you combine that with a battery, you can get much higher percentage capacity accreditation. Maybe not quite 100%, but you can get real close.
Do you count hydro as part of the storage too?
Not technically. We treat that as its own category.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
So mentioned that we do have a planning reserve requirement, and you can see that the 12% is the minimum. SPP as a region right now is actually what we would call long. We have plenty of extra capacity, which is a good thing. But you can see over the next 5 to 6 years that it starts to decline, and that's primarily because of two things. One, load growth expectations, and two, existing generators being retired. And so the more that we see those existing generators retired, at the same time as we're seeing load growth, the less planning reserves that we'll have. I like to use this picture. You probably don't need it. You probably will understand what I'm talking about when I talk about reserves. But if you look at a baseball team or any sports team, if you like sports analogies, the players that are on the field, those are the energy producers. Those are the people that are running the bases and swinging the bat and throwing the ball. That's energy. Capacity, though, is all team members, both the players on the field and those on the bench. It's their ability to play. Whether they're producing 1 ounce of energy or not doesn't matter. It's their ability to play that counts when you're thinking about capacity. Reserve margin is the ability of those players sitting on the bench. When your pitcher's worn out, you need to pull them, you got somebody else you can put in. And that's what's important. If you're going to make sure you're going to keep playing that game, you need to have some reserves that you can bring in if somebody gets hurt.
Growth margin.
Mm-hmm.
Growth of what?
Well, primarily consumption. During peak, that's what we're concerned about, is what do you expect your consumption to be during peak? And some places aren't projecting growth, some places are. On average, for our region, it's a little less than 1% growth that is expected. That's for the entire SPP footprint on average.
What do you, because around here, we're looking at it going up.
You're expecting more growth?
Well, yeah, I got 2 electric cars.
Yep.
I think that's the future.
Yeah, I believe,
But your analysis of the whole area would be more informative to me. Your projections, are they based on previous levels? Or are they based on what you forecast?
so to be clear, SPP staff does not do the projections. We rely on the projections that come from our members. So for example, City of Independence tells us what they project their peak consumption to be for next summer as well as the next 5. And then what we do is we just basically total all of that up to produce what we call a regional forecast.
So you do a Encompass survey?
Yep, that's exactly what it is. We
and-
survey all the members and they
and-
have a
and
deadline
had-
to supply us the
and what
data.
were and here again, had it previously been going down?
SPP's regional forecast has not declined for as long as I've been at SPP. We have traditionally seen, now the growth rates are lower now than they've ever been,
So these are
but
assumed
they're still
projections.
expected to grow at
Yeah,
about a
these-
0.7% growth rate.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you where, so if you look at the Balkans, they're seeing tremendous growth. It's because of the oil and gas shale play. And that can, if you look at a regional number, it could probably is skewing that number a bit. Because we've got, I mean, Kansas City Power and Light, for example, they're implementing tremendous energy efficiency programs. They're not expecting growth. They're actually expecting reductions in their peak consumption because of those energy efficiency programs.
They can expect all they want.
Understand.
It doesn't really reflect to me. I mean, it's an assumption made.
Yep,
Right.
yep, it is. It's an assumption. All right. So I'm going to, sake of time, I want to make sure I get through this. I don't want to dwell a whole lot on this. This just tells you that we do a lot. We operate a market, and we make sure the lights stay on. That's the reliability coordination piece. We are responsible for planning 10 years out into the future. Every now and then we'll do a 20-year plan, what the future infrastructure needs are. And those are the primary functions that we have and that we offer. Again, all centered around keeping the lights on. Some of the things that we don't do, I think it's important to understand those as well. I already mentioned the fact that we don't build distribution lines and we don't make sure that customers have power at their homes. We do plan the transmission grid. We operate the transmission grid, and then we also entertain requests for new generation. We don't site transmission. If we tell, for example, if we were to tell City of Independence that they needed to build a new transmission line, we would tell them to connect at this point and this point, point A to point B, but then it's up to them to figure out how to get it from point A to point B. So they do the transmission siting. Any permitting required is up to them. All we do is we study the need and we tell them when to build the transmission, and then it's up to them to figure out where to build it. Generation planning and generation siting, we don't do anything from a generator planning perspective. It's up to them to figure out what kind of resources they need. All we do is tell them they need to have at least 12% reserve margin. It's up to them to figure out if that needs to be gas, if it needs to be coal, if it needs to be wind, solar, hydro, whatever. As long as they meet our 12% reserve margin, we don't really care how they do it. That's up to them.
And that's purchased power also, right?
Yep. Yep. As long as it's deliverable and we can make sure that they have the right to call on it when they need it, that's good enough for us. All right, we do operate markets, energy markets, and just to make sure that we have, City of Independence needs to buy energy. They need to buy it every 5 minutes, and they need to make sure that they've got enough to balance and to regulate against. And they rely on us heavily for that. So we line up, that's what the market does, is it lines up buyers and sellers. In this case, the commodity is energy. We do that both on a real-time basis. We'll calculate every 5 minutes how much we need and where to get it from, and we select the cheapest generation that we can. The market participants will tell us how much they're willing to produce their energy for, how much it costs them and what their prices are, and then we select the cheapest generation we can anywhere in our 14-state footprint to make sure that your consumers can get the cheapest energy possible. So that's really what the market is. We do that on a 5-minute basis. That's a real-time spot market. And then we also do that on a day-ahead basis just to make sure that generators are ready to run when they're needed. So that's the purpose of that day-ahead and real-time spot market. I'm going to kind of speed through this. Just to give you some facts about the market, we have 225 market participants. These are essentially marketers that act on behalf of their consumers. We have 757 generating resources that we can call on. They'll tell us, again, they'll offer their prices to operate, and we'll select the cheapest ones we can to serve that next megawatt of load. We settle every year about a little over $20 billion. Again, we don't keep it, but the buyers give us the money, we pass that on to the sellers, and that's a settlement. So again, I already mentioned this, a little over 50,000 megawatts of peak demand. Our winter peak is actually increasing. It used to not be as high. We're getting really close on winter peak compared to our summer peak. The market, because we are facilitating kind of that stock exchange of energy, so to speak, we believe it provides over $570 million in savings on an annual basis. Because if we didn't do this, your utility would have to find somebody to sell them the energy. And there's no guarantee they're going to find the cheapest producer of that energy. So through our market, we're able to facilitate a tremendous amount of savings in energy cost for your customers. Transmission planning. And if you guys want me to speed on, all you got to do is give me a wink and nod, and I will speed on. So I talked a little bit about the fact that we have to plan out 10 years into the future, because the reason for that is it takes a long time to build transmission. We've seen in some cases it takes 8.5 years to build a new transmission line. So we want to make sure that we can project when we need it, so we can get started when we need to in order to be able to supply the demands that might exist in the future. And again, we're trying to make sure that we're projecting where new generation is going to be located. We want to make sure we project how existing generation is going to actually be used. We need to project where load is going to be added. Google, for example, and Facebook have added fairly large data centers in our footprint. And we have to make sure we've got transmission to meet their needs. It's not just about new generation. Sometimes it's about new load, and that's a good thing too. Adding load is a really good thing. And so that's kind of fun to get to plan for those. We do a number of studies. Some of them are studies that we do to make sure that we can provide and make sure that existing generators can continue to be delivered. Because once a customer has a firm transmission right to use the grid, we need to make sure that that right can continue to be maintained into the future. They'll ask for the right one time. And in fact, City Utilities of Independence has asked for delivery out of a power plant in Tulsa to Independence. Once we grant that right, it's our job then to make sure that every year they can continue to rely on that. So that's kind of our transmission planning study that goes on every year. There are other studies that we only do when requested, and that's an example of one that they've requested. Fortunately for them, there's 41 other participants in that study, which just simply means that the cost of doing the study is shared by those 41 participants. Makes it a little cheaper when you're leveraging other customers in that study cost. Also, if there are upgrades needed, all of those 41 customers, if they decide to stay in, will share the cost of those transmission upgrades. So that's another benefit of doing what we call an aggregate study process. On the downside of that, when you do an aggregate study process and you've got other customers involved at the same time, if one or two of those do decide to withdraw, you have to do another study. And that's why it can take up to 6 months for us to actually finish, because we do have to deal with some of those iterations. And that's a flow chart of the transmission service study process. I provided that simply because I know that you guys are interested. I know Utility Independence is requesting service out of a plant in Tulsa to deliver all the way to Independence, Kansas. And so that's the study process that they are currently undergoing right now. We expect to have an answer by November 15th, and that'll be a final answer. And based on that answer, then they can continue to perform their resource planning process. And that concludes my long-winded presentation. I apologize for taking so much of your time. But if you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you.
You bet.
And I don't know how to gild this lily, but I'm proud to be a member of SPP.
Well, we're proud to have you as members.
I think that your overall service, but it's a complex
It is.
cooperation. And people don't, I know it took me a while,
Yeah.
and I'm still shaky. But having you be the overseer to this, and I know that our little bit, I mean, we don't add a lot that we say you should do this or that. I mean, that's your business, and that's where you go with it. But being not-for-profit, when I took the course and when I was getting my master's in public administration, it doesn't mean you can't make a profit.
That's right. We just can't keep it.
Right, but you can have it for what you consider the future.
That's right.
And from what I'm hearing, which is just exactly what I've always heard, that the renewables are, the subsidizing has such an effect on it when it goes out and when it's withdrawn. And basically it's west, and so I can see that'd be the future. Are those lines available, and where you can tap in?
I have a question.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead. You go ahead.
gave it over here first. Excuse
Go
me.
ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, okay, never mind.
Thanks, Mike.
He relinquished.
Energy and capacity, those are two terms that I've become familiar with over the past couple of years. And can you dumb down your answer to my question of, we've had a lot of disagreement or discussion, I should say, that it's better to purchase energy versus just buying capacity. Does it make a difference to SPP which one we buy?
The one that we're concerned about from a reliability perspective is the capacity piece. Because that, if you go back to my analogy of a baseball team, clearly if you've got enough capacity, which again, capacity is both the players on the field and the players on the bench. If you've got enough capacity, we can keep the lights on. Now, energy is really a decision that you guys make. Whether you, because it may be more valuable to you to lock in energy prices now, but that's an analysis you have to do. It may not be more valuable to lock them in, because if you lock them in now and the prices go down, then you might have made a bad decision. I don't want to try to predict what that answer should be, but that's an analysis that you guys can direct your utility to do.
And so if we produce, I'm sorry.
Let me,
Okay.
one thing I
Okay.
want to add, the spot market that we operate will provide energy. It's just a matter of, do you want to expose yourself to the spot market prices, or do you want to line out ahead of time some certainty about what those energy prices are going to be?
And the spot
we
market
have
is the
the
5
energy.
minutes.
Yeah.
I mean,
we
when you
have
say
the
5
energy.
minutes, you're serious, right? I mean,
Yep, every 5 minutes, we procure energy to make sure that all customers are served.
Okay.
And the reason we can do that is because we've got enough capacity.
Thank you.
Capacity is the reliability piece, energy is the financial piece.
My biggest deal, this kind of stuff kind of keeps me up every once in a while, because we've always owned our power plant here. Now we're going into unknown territory. And I just want assurance that SPP plans the unthinkable when it happens, because it will happen sooner or later. We've seen the floods down here in Houston on the oil reserves, and the Saudis getting bombed, stuff like that. Government's prepared for that. It's kind of hard since we can't store power. Kind of interesting, your one with the airlines too, is the Thomas Cook there in England went bankrupt this morning, and that had a big effect. It had 100,000 people without ways to get home or transport. So I just want to make sure when we step into this thing that you guys done your studies 100%, that we're covered, because we're the ones that have to answer to that. So that's all I have.
Well, and I appreciate that. We take our job seriously, and we do our studies to the best that we can with the information we're provided. And we try to ensure that we plan that system so that it can still operate after a major contingency. Now, I can't cover extreme events. And
If you did, you wouldn't be here.
Yeah, exactly. But I can at least assure you that as long as it's not an extreme event and it's one contingency, and it could be a critical, it can be a severe contingency, but we can at least provide energy during those contingency events.
Right, we've always had that here, so now we're going completely the other way.
Yep.
So
It's hard. I don't think you would want us to build enough infrastructure to ensure we can withstand extreme events, because that would be pretty expensive.
So, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I'm in agreement with the others that we're very glad we're part of Southwest Power Pool. I think it has already saved Independence customers, Independence Power and Light, a significant amount of money. We've saved a significant amount of hours as well as employees by not having, on an individual basis, to try to find the cheapest power. So we're getting the cheapest power, and it's definitely going to save us a lot in the long run. The one last question I wanted to ask was about security. It seems that now almost every large entity is being bombarded daily by cyber attacks. And so you're controlled, and you're controlling our energy by computer.
Yep.
And so we're extremely dependent. And I'm more worried about that than I am any major catastrophe or other event, because I think the likelihood is much more likely that a cyber event could cause a problem or interruption of the power. So would you want to comment on that, and maybe comment on what, if anything, you think Independence Power and Light should do? I know a lot of our members are doing a lot of things as far as cybersecurity, and I want us to be all on the same page. I want us to be prepared as well as Southwest Power Pool. So,
Well, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that our Senior Vice President of IT is not here, because she would provide a much more diligent answer than I will be able to. But I can tell you that cybersecurity is a huge concern not just of SPP, but I'm sure you guys share that concern. Our CEO oftentimes, when asked what keeps you up at night, that's his number one answer, is cybersecurity. Now, we are obligated as a reliability coordinator and a market administrator, and based on all the different things that we do have reliability standards that we have to adhere to, some of which are cybersecurity standards. So we do take that very seriously, because if we do not adhere to those standards, we're subject to pretty stiff penalties. And the penalty, the financial piece of that is that's the least. The risk of losing credibility is even more expensive. So we do take it seriously, and my encouragement to you guys is take it seriously as well. Do everything you can to keep that at the top of your list, and just be vigilant. I mean, I get tired of getting emails that we have every month test to make sure that our staff are staying diligent and we're not clicking on links, for example. And we click on a link, we get punished pretty severely. Now, I shouldn't say that. We get scolded. You do it again, you have to undergo training. If you do it a third time, you get a letter that goes in your employment file. So that's not pretty, but those some of the things that we do just to help our employees understand that each and every employee is responsible for helping SPP stay safe from a cybersecurity, because if they get in through one employee, the whole system can go down. So that's important, is make sure that your employees are being trained and that they understand just how serious that can be. Now, on the good side, we do believe that we have enough backup systems in place that if we do lose control, we think the grid will still operate. And that's largely because we still have 99 members that are helping us work together to keep the lights on. So even if our plug gets pulled, that just means we have to turn over the operation to them. Will they be able to operate as efficiently as we will? No. I mean, you lose some of the benefits that we provide, but we still think the lights will stay on. We have to all stay vigilant.
Mayor Pro Tem. Did I hear you say the target date, November 15th, for our transmission study to be done?
That's when the study that City of Independence is currently in is
Right.
expected to finalize.
Good.
Yes.
Just wanted to double check that. Thank
Yep,
you.
You bet. We're happy you're members too, and my only disagreement with what you said earlier is your voice does matter. So make sure that you guys stay engaged, because every vote counts.
Well, as the council person has said, we're at odds on generation and capacity. So we're going to come to you.
Yep. We'll do the best we can to provide you the customer service you desire.
Any?
Yep, absolutely. Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And sorry to you guys that have to follow me for taking so long.
Did you want to end up anything, or? Well, okay, well, let me, our second presentation is on mutual aid through MPUA. Mr. City Manager.
Our second presentation this evening that it features another organization that is of critical importance to Independence Power and Light, and that's the Missouri Public Utility Alliance, or MPUA. Independence has a long tradition of participating in mutual aid efforts organized by MPUA. And we know that this has recently become a topic of discussion as we've been looking at various ways to try to reduce expenditures, to try to reduce rates. A question has come up as to what is the proper level that we should be involved in mutual aid. So we're lucky and very fortunate tonight to have some people from MPUA to come to make a presentation to talk to you about the benefits associated with mutual aid through MPUA. So we have with us tonight Mike Conyers, Mark Mustaine, and Connie Ford, all with MPUA, here to talk to you about the mutual aid program. So I don't know who's going first, Mike, or okay, Mark's going to talk first. So Mark Mustaine.
Connie's going to give a few handouts here. And, Mayor Pro Tem and council members, thank you for having us. We appreciate being here. Kind of the same as our friend from SPP, I'll just try to give an overview of the mutual aid program, what it is and how it works, and then I would be open as well, you know, as I go along. If something just, you know, immediately strikes you, if you have a question, go ahead and I can pause and try to answer those, or one of us will chime in. So, so once again, we are with the Missouri Public Utility Alliance, and Independence Power and Light and City of Independence are members of this organization. And so we administer a mutual aid program through this. We help coordinate this. And so what is mutual aid? In our handout there, just very simply, most of the time we think about it in the electric sense, because that seems to be what's on the news and affected most of the time, but it is there for water, wastewater, and gas as well. Any utilities that are ran can take part in mutual aid and maybe need mutual aid at some point, and it is there. So how does it work? Your city has entered into an agreement with all the other utilities in Missouri, and it's not just in Missouri, it is nationwide. And so we have a Missouri Public Utility Alliance, we have a mutual aid agreement, and there is an APPA, American Public Power Association mutual aid agreement. With the APPA agreement, that actually even brings in electric cooperatives. So ultimately, you're part of a network of over 2,000 utilities that can help one another in times of need. So there's typically an ordinance, a resolution that will be passed at the time that agreement is put in place. The mutual aid, obviously, is when that storm hits most of the time. You know, most of the time it's going to be some sort of natural disaster. Nature is obviously the number one issue to cause major outages. You know, windstorms here in this part of the nation is probably going to be straight line winds, you know, microburst, obviously tornadoes. And then in the wintertime, we're looking out for ice storms or even some of the different heavy snow events. And those, whether it's just statewide, can cause numerous outages in your system or other systems, and which may require mutual aid to be called in to Independence, for example, and have other utilities come here and help you guys get the lights back on in your areas that were hit hard. And of course, then vice versa. You can be called on as well to assist others. Now, during this agreement, there is no time at which you are absolutely obligated to respond. If for some reason you are not able to respond, you just simply say, we are unable to respond to this storm. You know, sometimes there might be forecasts for maybe more storms to hit, and you're wanting to keep your guys here and let someone else from a different part of the state that maybe doesn't have those storms forecasted. In the national realm, that really hits a lot when, just for example, recently, as the hurricane was slowly approaching Florida, we were on calls with APPA to try to get the assistance there ahead of time. And those utilities in Georgia and the Carolinas, they were staying home. They were waiting to see what turn the hurricane made before they committed to help Florida, and vice versa. So it's not so much on the local level that is done so much. It's typically the storm comes through, you have a lot of outages, you need some help, you call myself or Mike. We're the coordinators for Missouri. And so your utility will call one of us and say, have done an assessment to see just maybe exactly how many crews you need. Do you need 5 crews? Do you need 10 crews, et cetera? And what type of equipment you might need. If you've got any special, have you had more distribution issues, or do you have some transmission poles damaged? The assessment is very important in that when that call is made to the coordinator to get the help that you really need as quickly as possible. So, as it says, you evaluate your situation, give the coordinator the call so we can get the right logistics. And then as far as how that works is in pay, all the cities, all the municipals are working for their own utility, even when they're on your property, for example. So if City of Columbia Water and Light comes to Independence and helps you, they are still working for City of Columbia Water and Light. And City of Columbia Water and Light is paying their employees at whatever their wage rate is for in their contract or in their ordinance, whatever their pay grade, however it's determined. So, and then when that storm is over and they return home, then they will send a bill to Independence Power and Light. And Independence Power and Light would then pay that bill, pay that invoice back to Columbia Water and Light. Now, if that is, there are different times when that could be a state of emergency declared. If it's a federal state of emergency and then FEMA would happen to be involved and you could get funds from FEMA for the funds that you spent to get that assistance, then you can get reimbursed up to 100%. I mean, it's not always 100%. It sometimes can be 80%. I think is more standard. But there are ways for the municipal utility that needs assistance to get funds from the federal government, but that's in a situation where it has been determined that it's a federal emergency, which is almost always the case in the hurricanes. It's such a large amount of damage that it is determined that that's a federal disaster area, and so then FEMA will be reimbursing those Florida utilities for the money that they spend to have, for example, Missouri utilities to come down. So when we sent just recently 46 line workers to Florida to stage in Orlando, that cost is paid by Orlando to all the utilities that sent them the help, and then they will request from FEMA funds to reimburse for the money that they had to spend for us to come help. So there's, try not to be too confusing there. Hopefully it's not too confusing, because it's just the different levels of the help that is needed. So you've got your state level, local, it may just be, you guys have responded to Harrisonville recently. And so Harrisonville called us, needed some help. They just needed 2 or 3 crews, so sent some help there. Odessa was even more recent. I think maybe just 1 crew was able to go assist them. I'm not certain on the numbers there. So there's small responses, storms in that respect, and those, that's just going to simply be paid for out of typically like reserve funds. You were talking about having, a nonprofit, but typically I'd call that reserves, because when is that storm going to hit that you're going to need this money to maybe pay someone to help you get your system back up and running. So just going down through, like I said, you're always working for your own utility at your own pay scale. You're charging also for your equipment that you've sent. there's typically either a mileage rate or an hourly rate. That's typically the FEMA rates are available. And so since FEMA wants you to use that rate in any type of national event, most of them tend to use that in local events as well. FEMA has established a rate. You can just go there and you can see what type of truck you have, what type of boom, and you just charge per that. Pretty much, as far as some of the experiences that you guys have had over the years, I mean, it's been pretty extensive, but it's been, I mean, in my opinion, very much necessary. You know, the mutual aid, each utility really relies heavily on knowing that they have a neighbor willing to help. And, you know, there have been many instances where Independence has responded nationally. Just some of the ones that I have, you go back to 2012, Hurricane Isaac in August, had Superstorm Sandy. That was a large one. Just as recently as 2017, the 2016 Hurricane Matthew hit Florida. Then 2017 Irma, Maria, and responded even to the Virgin Islands for that one. And I saw firsthand, went down about 6 months later, and the damage that was being repaired still at that time. And without the mutual aid program, I mean, the restoration would have been taken much, much longer. So the mutual aid is just very important to everyone involved, whether you're on the assisting end or you're on the receiving end. It's just, I can't speak enough of how important that is to each utility. Local ones, I mean, it's quite often that maybe regionally you have just a smaller utility and maybe a couple other small neighboring utilities will come help if the storm is bad enough. You know, a lot of the times you can take care of it yourself. It's not every time that there's a storm you don't necessarily need mutual aid. So the big item is you think about what if there was, you know, widespread damage. And so far, it seems that we've been on, most of the time, the assisting in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, the coast has been on the receiving end. That's where most of the storms have been. But you don't know when possibly that large ice storm may come. And half of Missouri maybe have a half inch of ice on everything or more, and not just Independence, but every utility from the northwest corner of Missouri to the southwest corner of Missouri is needing assistance. And it's going to be necessary that we would help coordinate assistance, maybe, you know, if Kansas, Iowa, if they were in okay shape, or if it was even wider spread than that. Earthquakes are another issue that well, I don't know about highly unlikely, but we don't think about it very often. But, you know, the New Madrid Fault in southeast Missouri probably wouldn't affect you guys here, but could affect a large area. And so we want to be able to assist those around the state or around the nation, so that way when we need to help, we're able to call on those as well and have them come assist us in the same way. For the most part, I mean, that's kind of on, in a nutshell, how it works. I mean, there's just simply the need arises, the coordination happens, and people respond to the need. And Independence has been very instrumental in responding to the need. And part of that is just the size and the ability of your utility. So you've got more line workers, more experience, more equipment. So sometimes you may be called on more often, but it's just because you just have the ability to be called upon. And Independence has obviously been the recipient of those, of that assistance many times as well. Each year, there have been, in the last several years, I did have a few down here listed. Trying to find that when, I know that was in 2017, there were, from mutual aid of 4 different municipals came here. It was a pretty bad windstorm. That was here in 2017. 2015 was another year that we had 9 municipals come assist. And just here recently this year, I think that was a little bit smaller one. I believe there was, I think just 3 municipals came and helped you guys in the windstorm this year. So, but that's just kind of a little bit of the history of Independence's role in our mutual aid program and essentially how it works. And I don't know if you have any other questions or if you guys have any, if I covered everything or.
Okay, so you ask us.
When there's a need, yes.
Right, okay, so we don't respond unless asked.
Correct.
Okay, and you ask for specific,
Yes, we ask for specific amounts of crews and equipment.
and what those crews are made of. I mean, one of the questions here that they wanted to say, linemen. I mean, we don't put our packages together, we fill what you request.
Correct.
All right. And you know, you naturally, I mean, it's, when it's FEMA and things, but geographically, you do that too. I mean, this is your job and you take that into consideration.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so the selection of this is based on all of those things.
Yes.
Yeah. So you make a community of it and bring it on.
We try to regionalize it as much as possible. Absolutely. So we try to assist
we
others
always
in a
have
part of
the-
the, yeah, you
we
kind of,
always-
whether it's statewide, you know, just a region of the state, try to draw from the region first and then move out from that.
And we always have the option of refusing.
Correct. And the same way in the national, it's regional first, and then if it's a big enough event, then they move out to the other regions. FEMA has broken the country down into, I think it's maybe about 10 or 12 regions. We are members of Region 7 in Missouri.
Ooh.
And so, right, yeah. So whatever that's worth. But so yes, it's a localized and then a regional and then nationwide, if you need to. Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilman.
Thank you. So when you say you ask, is that like just a general, I'm going to oversimplify this, general email blast to all the municipalities who are participant and whoever responds back is those who respond back?
Correct.
So,
You know, if it's more of a local thing, it may just be Mike or I just giving someone a call at the utility saying, hey, we've got this utility that needs some help. Do you guys think you could send a crew or 2 crews or whatever you got? Then if it is like recently, yes, we just sent out an email to the entire state, all the utilities, and just see what we could drum up.
The next question or two maybe for city staff, Mr. City Manager. So at that point of contact, when the discussion is being had of can we assist or not assist, who makes that determination?
When we get a request, usually it'll be Jeff Barnett, our superintendent of T&D, will ask me about it. If it's a local situation, then we will approve it. at that level. The city manager is required that he's going to personally approve anything that's an out-of-state response.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem. Yeah. So just a couple questions. So do most of the utilities, even the investor-owned ones, do they respond well as
Yes, yes,
we
they do,
have?
yes.
I know
It's-
we've sent a lot out. I just wondered if, a lot of the investor-owned ones did likewise, or if it was mostly
Yes, each,
co-ops and.
you got your municipal utilities, your electric co-ops, and then your investor-owned utilities. And each one has a group representing them. And when there's something as large as the most recent hurricane, or any of the large hurricanes like that, they will meet at the table of the Department of Energy every day. So the APPA will be there representing us, NRECA, and then the EEI for the investor owns. And so they will all meet with the Department of Energy, because the Department of Energy wants to know ahead of time, what are you guys doing? Are you getting the resources that you need ready? Are they going to be here when the lights go out? And how quick do you think it'll be restored? And each organization has to answer that. So they've all got similar types of setups for mutual aid, and yes, the response is very similar.
I guess a follow-up question is, do we staff for this? So if, for instance, if we get a call and we send 2 or 3 crews out of state, are we staffed to be covered in case something happens here? I guess that's for Mark.
What happens is when I send crews out of town from Independence, I have backup for this city.
Okay.
So we have
Good.
smaller groups that we can put together that may just be comprised of 2 or 3 guys, but we can make a full crew out of them and make sure that if we send you guys all the way to Florida, something happens, I've got those crews coming back in here if a storm hits here. So we do have
comforting.
backup. Yeah.
Good.
And I started in 2005, and I started the mutual aid program for MPUA and the safety program, and we now have 180 apprentices that we train, most of here. The reason that we use Independence so much, along with Columbia and not so much Springfield anymore, is because I can always depend on these linemen. These are some of the best in the country. They get the job done, and the Department of Energy knows about these guys because I was at the New Madrid Fault Roundtable when Barry Moline needed 12 crews sent to Florida, and I won $50 saying that I couldn't have them ready to go by noon. These guys were already on the road. So these are some, I've worked with Mike, some of the best guys that you can work with, and we need Independence. I mean, we need you guys like we need Columbia and Springfield, because when something hits and all these little towns fall to pieces, we need the big guys to come in and clean it up.
Thanks.
And we got to have it.
Thanks.
If I could just jump in there really quick, too. I really do want to mention that Jeff Barnett, the first thing he always does whenever these requests comes, he analyzes what our needs are going to be, as well as the MPUA folks. But Jeff personally always makes sure, that's always the first conversation we have, is what are we going to need? And he always is watching to see if any there's storm implications in our neighborhood before he even asks for it. So I just want to leave you with that confidence that Jeff, that's always on his mind, and he's never asked for us to respond with crews that he felt was leaving us shorthanded.
I just have a question. When our linemen go to Florida, for example, they're working and they get paid still by the City of Independence?
Correct.
And you all, Florida, pays the City of Independence?
Right. Whatever utility they're assisting.
What if they're hurt? What if one of our linemen is hurt in Florida?
Your workman's comp covers you.
You've got to come to the microphone. Sorry.
Your workers' compensation covers you out of state, the same as
Okay.
it does here.
So it doesn't matter that they're in Florida?
No. All dollars spent by the City of Independence are reimbursable at 100% by whatever utility you're working for.
Okay.
Now, if anything can happen. We've not had anybody seriously injured. We've had some fingers smashed and some
I heard
some
we lost a
scratches.
truck. I heard we lost a truck in the Virgin Islands or something? Okay.
Yeah.
I assume a truck is fairly expensive. What happened with our truck? And did we, I assume, get reimbursed
Yeah,
for
you
the truck?
You got reimbursed for it.
Okay, did we have to make a deductible payment?
I'm not sure about that.
Did we have to rent another truck to cover us while we're here?
The truck that you all sent, these guys would have to tell me which one it was, but it was a bucket
Well, I don't
truck.
care what kind of, I just
was
know
it
what
was a bucket
happens.
truck.
I mean,
I'm sure a deductible was paid, but it was my understanding that the City of Independence was reimbursed for that truck 100%.
okay, okay.
The crane company and the ship company that dropped it off on its side,
On its side.
I'm sorry, but it was.
Nobody was hurt,
They're
though,
insured.
correct?
Nobody. Correct. No. They're insured at 100% and they took care of the equipment. So,
Okay, so the only out-of-pocket really we're looking at as a city is the bump up in the loggers' retirement to the linemen who are going to work overtime at these sites.
I would say yes.
Is that true or not true? If anybody can answer that.
Well,
That's really not our.
You got to talk,
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that's not exactly our expertise, but in your bill that you send, I mean, it's gonna be wages plus benefits. So I don't know. if-
oh, they're going to pay the loggers' contribution?
Well, if that logger's contribution is something that comes kind of after the fact, I mean, you're gonna send a bill immediately. And so, but you're not just sending a bill for wages only. I mean,
Okay.
You're gonna send a bill for wages plus benefits.
Okay,
And so whatever that adds up, your.
if it's a
your
percentage
internal-
added in there, that's what you will bill them.
Your internal
So if
accounting
it's-
department would need to come up with what is the number that will cover, not only the wages that your linemen are making, but to cover their benefits and for health insurance.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Any other,
But before you guys leave the state, we send a contract.
Okay.
We send a city contract. They have to have that contract so that they can agree that they'll accept you guys to come in.
so like
and do the
Florida
work.
would send the contractor,
Yeah.
okay.
And we will send the City of Independence's contract so that they agree on the wage scale and all the things there, and that's all we give them. They
Okay.
don't get anything else, just a copy of the wages. So you're reimbursed at 100% for all of their health insurance, loggers, if that's part of a package and a percentage.
And I know I sound really cheap, and I don't mean to. I just know that we lost a truck, and I never
It
knew
was-
what happened with that truck.
Yeah,
And
but
I
it
would
was
think-
reimbursed at 100%. It was paid for by the shipping company.
Okay,
I believe the truck was replaced.
Yeah.
yes?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem? If I could jump into the discourse here, I would assume, Councilwoman, that all that they have said is correct, but at the point of retirement, whatever that number has been figured into, that overtime, that number, the longevity of that number would be the burden of the City of Independence, unless I am not correct with that.
Okay. I was just curious.
I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
Maybe we can have the finance gentleman sometime in the future answer that. I'm just confused. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey, Mike, while you're up
Yeah.
there, when did we want to get paid 80% when he said that? I've never ever heard that before. That's the first time.
80%.
80% reimbursed.
I think
No.
sometimes maybe FEMA will not reimburse 100%.
Yeah, they don't.
Okay, okay.
Only
I
FEMA.
didn't wanted some,
Yeah.
You will get
100.
100%
okay,
reimbursed.
okay. That threw me there. I was like, 80%, when did that ever happen?
Yeah, that might have been confusing.
That cost incurs from the time that I call. When I call Jeff and I tell him I need 2 full line crews with digger trucks, bucket trucks, and backyard equipment, 5 guys on each crew, the clock starts right there on Florida's time. So while these guys are packing their bags, going home, getting all their stuff ready, they're on Florida's clock until they get back home. That's their meals, their hotels, their expenses, whatever they have.
Why does the money come to us? I don't understand. Like, when I'm a police officer and I'm working a job, a second job, Hy-Vee, for example, the city isn't involved in that arrangement. Is there some reason the city's involved in this arrangement? I just don't understand why.
Well, you're, basically, the city of Independence is working for another utility. And all you're doing, the only person we deal with is probably the city clerk, in most cases. The billing
Okay.
comes in, she takes care of it or whatever.
Well,
And,
and I would say maybe a better analogy would be is recently Jeff City had a tornado. And not only did they need some utility, now that was all investor owned, but their police department, City of Columbia police officers went and assisted with curfews and things like that for a couple of days. Well, the city of Jefferson City had to reimburse City of Columbia for the time.
So maybe
that-
it's the scale
So
of the assistance.
that's more of a straight mutual aid. You know, you're
Okay.
talking more about a second job.
Right.
And so. and
That's the
That's
difference.
the difference.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate it. And our final presentation is a business license division update. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you. I'd like to invite Tom Scannell up to give a presentation about this.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. My name is Tom Scannell. I'm the Community Development Director. Back in April of this year, we began a new program to proactively seek out businesses that had delinquent accounts, as well as finding new businesses that were operating within the city without a business license. These duties have been handled by our business license compliance staff. When we started this program, we hoped to accomplish a few goals. First is we wanted to put a name with the face. We wanted to help educate those businesses on the different city and state regulations, help answer questions that they may have, and provide them with resources. We also wanted to respond quicker to complaints and to coordinate with other departments on regulations and get them in touch with other departments if necessary. Prior to starting this program, we had a very time-consuming and very inefficient process that involved mailing several different letters and hoping that the business would respond, complete their paperwork, provide that to the city, and pay their fees. What we found since rolling out this new program is that businesses have been quicker to respond. So we're getting them, we're getting these businesses in compliance quicker, but yet we're also doing this at a more cost-effective manner. So as we have mentioned in our previous presentation, staff works off a delinquent account report. This is a report that we run each month. It lists the businesses that have delinquent business license accounts. And so each month they systematically go through that list, visit each location, talk to the owner or manager of that business, and essentially bring those businesses into compliance. As staff has been out in the field visiting these businesses, they've also been looking for businesses that have been operating without a business license. And you can see on the screen there those main thoroughfares that are listed. Those are kind of the routes that they focus their attention on for unlicensed businesses. So when we started this program, we estimated that we would collect about $67,000 for the year. This number was based off of the number of delinquent accounts times the minimum of our business license fee. That's where we came up with that $67,000. So over the last 6 months, we have been able to address 229 delinquent business license accounts. This means that the accounts were either closed due to the business no longer operating, the business changed or moved and they filed new paperwork, or they renewed their business license, submitted their required paperwork, and paid their fees, bringing their account into compliance. Of the 229 delinquent accounts, only 66 were closed due to no longer operating, while the remaining either renewed or applied for new business license. The hard work of these business license staff has paid off. Since we started our efforts, we have collected over $124,000 from delinquent and unlicensed businesses. This number is pretty impressive if you consider that when we started out this program, we were estimating an additional $67,000 to be collected for the year. On this screen, we have the number of renewals for the last two years, along with the number of renewals for the current fiscal year. In the 2 full months for this fiscal year, we have already topped over 2,300 business license renewals and are on pace to top over 10,000 business license renewals in a year. If we hit that number, this would be a significant increase over the last couple of years. I've spent a lot of time going over the accomplishments of this new program, but I wanted to highlight what's next. Going forward, staff's going to continue to perform their daily field inspections into non-compliant businesses, whether they are delinquent in their business license account or whether they are unlicensed. We will continue to provide education and resources so that the business remains in compliance. We want our businesses to be successful, yet do so in compliance with our regulations. And finally, focus on our internal processes, identify efficient opportunities. We get feedback from our businesses, and we listen to those, and we try to tweak and make adjustments to our processes. So, with that concludes the presentation, and available for any questions.
Is this combined with the rental ready? Are these numbers?
These numbers are not rental ready. No, they do not.
So they're separate?
Correct.
And wow, this is great.
Correct.
What a wonderful addition to this whole situation. I mean, this adds up to quite a bit of money here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
You need help?
We always would love to have additional help. I think staff is great. They love what they do. They're very passionate about it, and yet they provide that customer service touch so that the businesses can put a name with the face and feel like we're just not a faceless, nameless city. So.
Okay, thank you.
One question, Tom. One question, Tom. The list there next to the last page talks about fiscal year 18, 19, and 20. How comes 20 is so much lower? Is that renewals that you've already done for 20?
That is just for the first 2 months of this fiscal year.
Okay.
So
that's this fiscal year?
Correct, yeah. So in the 2 months, so July 1 through the end of August, they've already processed 2,381 business license renewals. So if you extrapolate that out, you're on pace to top 10,000 business license renewals. So
thank you.
Quite an effort.
And I have 2 questions. First, is there a requirement that business licenses be displayed to the public?
Yes.
Okay. So if I go into a spot and they don't have a business license, should I call codes or should I call you? Because I've gone into places where they don't display those licenses, and I can't imagine that you have enough workers that could go around to each shop in the City of Independence to see if they're displaying it.
Correct. The business license is supposed to be displayed.
So who do I call if it's not there?
That'd be one of the business license staff. Just
325-7000, ask for business license?
Yes.
Okay. Second question. The drop-down box online to renew isn't working. Just FYI.
Okay.
I've had some people tell me they've tried to renew and they can't.
Sometimes that system's a little quirky, but that's good to know. We'll get that addressed.
And again, if it happens again, 325-7000 business license?
Correct, yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, our first staff report is a report on a Washington DC trip by John Mayfield, Mr. City Manager.
I'll invite John Mayfield up for a quick presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. John Mayfield, City Manager's Office. I kind of wish this had been titled something slightly differently, but we'll go with what we got. This staff report pertains to the annual Independence Chamber Fly-In to Washington DC, September 10th through the 12th. The mayor, the city manager, myself participated, as well as Tom Lesnick from the Independence Chamber of Commerce and Sarah Beth Wood. As you may remember, in 2018, we kind of transitioned from a membership-based agreement with the chamber to more of a paid contractor situation, and one of the deliverables is legislative advocacy, which is one of the reasons why they went on the trip with us. Just want to kind of give you a flavor of what happened, who we met with, and what we briefly talked about. On September the 11th, we met with Senator Josh Hawley and his legislative director Ryan Levitt, as well as Congressman Graves and his staff members Megan Schmidtline and Wyatt Mullendore, as well as Congressman Cleaver's office. On September the 12th, we met with Senator Roy Blunt and his policy advisor, Andrew Velocity. And we discussed several issues. I know I'm supposed to be brief, so I'll try to go through these as fast as I can and yet give you some meat on the bone. We talked about CDBG funding. In 2017, there were a lot of rumbles out of Washington, D.C. about either eliminating this program altogether or greatly reducing it. And as you well know, this program helps us stabilize neighborhoods. We used it in the previous fiscal year to do some home teardowns that needed to be torn down. This year, you first read a bill last week about College Street improvements, and some of the funding for that project is CDBG funding. So I think that shows how important that program is, and we feel it's very important to keep these issues in front of our congressional delegation. We receive annually about $775,000 in federal funding from CDBG, and that's very valuable funds that we use. And so we have to kind of fight for it and keep it in front of the congressional delegation. We talked about COPS funding. We talked about widening the Missouri 7 Highway, the methodology of the 2020 census, and protecting the tax exempt status of municipal bonds. I know some of that sounds really, really beautiful and a lot of nuance there, but basically the COPS program is currently under an injunction by a federal court. So mainly we talked about just having open lines of communication with our congressional delegation. If they hear anything, we would love to apply for that again. Currently, we're not able to do that. As many people in the eastern side of the city can tell you, Missouri 7 Highway could use some public safety improvements. It's, as you know, very curvy, hilly. There's some blind spots there. Lake City is growing. We have Fort Osage High School and Indian Trails Elementary School out that way. A lot of commercial traffic there. Really could use some improvements. We're talking about a $40 million project. I've never asked for $40 million before, so that was exciting. And we're working on that. The one thing that we are really concerned about is the 2020 census. As I mentioned, we get $775,000 from CDBG funding based on our population. We also are able to apply for other grants and other federal funding. And this year, for the first time, they're going to try to do a significant amount of their data collecting online. They're trying to do about 80% of their participation online. And why we are concerned about that, several reasons. First, we have a lot of folks in our community that don't have internet access in their homes. They may have a family member that has a smartphone or a tablet, or they may have a neighbor or someone who lets them use it, or they may go to the public library. But I've heard upward to close to 40% of Independence residents may not have internet access in their homes. It doesn't mean they don't have it altogether, but they may not have it in their home. They may have, as I said, a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a coworker. They may have a device that they allow them to use, but in their homes themselves, a lot of folks, I have members of my family don't have internet in their homes. So we're really concerned about that. We need a very complete count for lots of reasons. One, our federal funding is dependent on that. Hospitals, academics, businesses, governments, we all use that data. And the second reason we're a little concerned about this 80% online participation goal as was mentioned earlier, cybersecurity issues. I don't know if many of you attended the chamber luncheon on Wednesday, but David Evans from Kansas City, Missouri city government was there talking about significant issues, and they're kind of scary. And we mentioned that to Senator Hawley, that in particular these were two of our main concerns with the census, that he had shared that he was concerned about that as well and shared that information in a Homeland Security Committee meeting the week before. So getting that feedback from us was very valuable and important to him. He needs to, our elected officials need to hear these concerns, not just that they have them, but their constituencies have those concerns as well. And finally, we talked about the tax exempt status on municipal bonds. Every time there's a tax cut bill or there's tax reform talked about, tax exempt status of municipal bonds comes up, and if that were to go away, it could increase our borrowing cost by 33 to 50%. And I can tell you, I'm sure you can all understand, that would make a lot of projects, out of our reach to do. So those are some of the things that we talked about, and we are continuing to follow up with the offices of our local congressional delegation, and we will keep you updated as we possibly can. And with that, I'm available for any questions you might have.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayfield. I noticed that receipts for the lodging and the transportation were provided to the Finance Department. If citizens would like to know how much was spent on that trip, how do they find out?
Well, I can tell you it's my understanding the trip cost, and this is for the city manager, the mayor, myself, the chamber, was some completely different. Total cost is my understanding $4,775, and I can get you a more detailed breakdown if you'd like.
I just remember maybe 6 months ago that it was going to be put up on our website, that the Finance Department was going to have a special area where any citizen could go and click to see cost of transportation, cost of hotel, cost of meals. And I just don't know that that was done, or, like, I understand that I can call the city manager and say, how much was this trip? But the citizens, I know, were promised this maybe 6 months ago, and so much has happened, I don't know if that ever happened. So is there anything a citizens can click on to take a look on our city webpage to see this information?
That's not something I could address, but that's something I can definitely look in for you, Councilman.
Okay. Maybe next time we could just ask someone to let the citizens know how we can get that. That would be terrific.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayfield.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, where are we at? Our final staff report is boards and commissions. Madam City Clerk.
We have a few boards and commissions that we're looking for recommendation to be able to add resolutions to the next regular council meeting. The first one is the Independence Honor Roll Working Group Committee. We've received recommendation to appoint Lori Dean Wiley to this board. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution to the next meeting.
Hearing none.
Okay. The next commission is the Independence Park Commission. We have recommendation to appoint Gail Price as the individual council appointment for Councilman Roberson, and we have Jolie Austin, who's the individual council appointment for Councilmember Van Camp. If there's no objection, we'll add a resolution to the next meeting.
Hearing none.
And then we have the Tree Commission. We've received a recommendation to reappoint Justin Thatcher, and this is an individual council appointment by Mayor Weir. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution to the next meeting.
Hearing none.
And then we have the Inglewood CID Board of Directors. Recommendation has been made to appoint Tammy Parsons, Scott Calger, Ann Hinojosa, Joshua Patterson, Carrie Paris, Bruce Lawrence, and Joseph Crownover. If there's no objections, we'll add a resolution to the next meeting.
Hearing none.
And then finally, we have a recommendation to reappoint Donald DeBoard. It's an individual council appointment for Councilmember Tom Van Camp, and this is to the Public Safety Tax Oversight Committee. If there's no objection, we'll add a resolution to the next meeting.
Hearing none.
That's all I have.
All right. Is there anything else council would like to discuss? We are adjourned.